Hey Bullets YouTube channel.
Hurry up, now tell us why you're here.
Reason that you did not see this in the previous race video is because the Piston Cup changed the points format at the last minute, but only for these 14 cars who can now win the Piston Cup. The reason they can all win the Piston Cup is because the Piston Cup dragged everybody's points up to 5,000. Piston Cup officials, why did you do this? And you're probably asking, where's Bobby Swift and Brick Yardley? Now, this anonymous Piston Cup fan that you're probably familiar with has this to say to the Piston Cup's new points format for this one race. Here's another example of Piston Cup officials abusing their power. Aaron Breakwheel and Speedson Larson have now been both suspended for this race for protesting the points format. And in practice, Alex Food would have a career-ending crash. And Alex Food would have this to say after his crash. And Tony Gassworth will not be taking part in qualifying. How will this go? Vitalin Racing has also merged with Chevrolet Motorsports before this race, and Arthur Carstro wasn't ready for the race on time. What was his team doing? I feel bad for Arthur. His team has one job, and they couldn't do it. Now, on to more team talk, where Brick Yardley has to say this to his sponsor, and the Vitalin sponsor says, sorry Brick, my mind's made up. And he's giving his number to a new racer. This now means that Brick Yardley has been fired by Team Vitalin. Lightning McQueen has this to say, and Brick Yardley says, hey, I had 2 wins last year. Which is true. He did win 2 races in 2015. And the sponsor says, all sports change. I mean, he's not wrong. And Lightning McQueen says, hey Bobby, do you know what's happening with Brick? Well, where is Bobby Swift? Well, he lost in a race as this racer beat Bobby Swift. This new rookie is Danny Swervez. And Danny Swervez revs his engine, introducing himself to Lightning McQueen. And who replaced Brick Yardley? This racer, Chase Racelot, replaces Brick Yardley. Chase Racelot is Bill Racelot's son, and now Chase will be Vitalin's racer in the number 24. And if you remember some of my earlier videos, why was his diecast so rare before? Now, onto the starting grid, where obviously Jackson Storm will start at pole position for the 19th time in a row. And Harvey Rodcapt, who's outside. Row 2 has Chase Racelot in his first race, starting alongside JD McPillar in 4th. Row 3 has Chris Roman and Cam Spinner, both hoping to do well this race. Now on to Row 4, where Lightning McQueen will be starting alongside new racer Danny Swervez. Row 5 has Herb Kerbler and Buck Beeringly, surprisingly qualifying very well. Row 6 has Ricky Axel starting alongside H.J. Hollis. I wonder how they'll do this race. Row 7 surprisingly has 2 stock cars, Dino Draftsky and Ralph Carlo. Now on to Row 8, where Kevin Carvick will be starting alongside Martin Carrix Jr. I wonder how they'll do this race. Row 9 has Jonas Carvers and Ryan Inside Laney starting on the outside. Row 10 has Reb Meeker and Aaron Clocker to his outside. Now on to Row 11, where Sebastian Silva and Green Bean Carfiend will start. I wonder how they'll do this race. Row 12 has Bubba Wheelhouse and Steve Slick LePage with maybe some slick moves. Row 13 has teammates James Garrison and Jamarcus K-Cart starting in this row. Now on to Row 14, where Flip Dover, how'd you start all the way back here? And Eric Breaker, who's outside. Row 15 has Brian Sparks starting on the inside of a next generation racer, Jim Reverick. Row 16 has Cal Williams in his final race with Dynaco, and Pitbull Speed Racer, who's outside. Row 17 has Nick Shift and Ed Trunkin. Why are you starting all the way back here? Same with you two, Richie Gunzit and Barry DePedal in row 18. And now onto row 19, where JP Drive! How are you qualifying this badly? And Rev Rodages, who's outside. Tim Treadless! How are you starting in 39th? And Dan Garcia, you in 40th. How are you guys qualifying this badly when you're next generation racers? Row 21 looks a bit more normal with Darren Leadfoot and Paunchy Wipeout starting in this row. And starting in 43rd is Maury Clutchburn, making his 1,152nd Piston Cup start, as well as his final ever Piston Cup start, where he will start from the final position. Ryan Thunderbolt Jr. was robbed of having his final start being the 2016 LA 500. But many other cars, some of which I show here, some of which I don't, will also all fail to qualify for this race. That is sad. But Dino Draftsky and Craig Shiftwright are laughing because Ryan Thunderbolt Jr. failed to qualify for this race. Now onto the race, where Jackson Storm will lead the first 31 laps of the race before losing the lead to Danny Suarez, who will lead his first 4 Piston Cup laps. But on lap 35, Kevin Karvik would take the lead for himself, leading all the way until lap 67, where Danny Suarez would retake the lead. He will lead for 3 more laps before Jackson Storm would of course retake the lead. Jackson Storm would lead for 16 more laps before Chase Racelot would take the lead for the first time in his career, leading until lap 92, where Danny Suarez will take the lead once again. He will lead until lap 117, where of course Jackson Storm will take the lead for himself, leading all the way until lap 155, where Tim Treadless would make his way up to the front and lead the field until lap 156. Jamarcus Cakart would be out because of an engine failure on lap 156. Jackson Storm would take the lead on lap 156, surprisingly, and lead until lap 172. Cal Williams would be out on lap 162 because of a transmission issue. And Tex Dynaco will say this after the DNF. But, Pitbull Speed Racer would not have the specific parts he needs on lap 163. And now he's out because he can't get the parts. Danny Suarez will take the lead on lap 172 and lead until lap 209, where Jackson Storm would of course take the lead. He would lead until lap 221, where James Garrison would take the lead for the first time this race. But, Kevin Karvik would be third as of lap 221, where he accidentally wrecks James Garrison, Green Bean Carafine, Martin Carrix Jr., Sebastian Silva, and himself. Why? Jackson Storm would take the lead after the restart and lead until lap 236. Meanwhile, Lightning McQueen is struggling to compete against the next generation racers. And also, Arthur Carstro is ready to race. Guys, it's a little too late. But Arthur Carstro did get his next generation upgrade, which means this is now his new look. He'll have to wait until the 2017 Piston Cup season to use it, though, because his team took too long to make the upgrade. Chris Roman would take the lead on lap 236 and lead for 8 laps before Jim Reverick would take the lead from him off of pit cycles. But after the pit stops are done, obviously, Jackson Storm would take the lead, leading for 10 more laps. On lap 254, Tim Treadless would retake the lead and then lose the lead to Harvey Rodcap, who will take the lead for the first time this race and lead for 11 laps. Before, of course, Jackson Storm would take the lead again, leading for 4 more laps before Danny Suarez would take the lead once again, leading for 2 more laps before Aaron Clocker would take the lead for himself on lap 270 off of pit cycles. Tim Treadless would take the lead after the pit stops are done, leading for 18 more laps before Jackson Storm would take the lead for himself once more, leading for 9 more laps before Danny Suarez would take the lead once again, leading until lap 301, where Jackson Storm will obviously take the lead. He will lead for 5 more laps before Chase Racelot would take the lead. He would lead for 6 laps before somehow Eric Breaker would take the lead off of pit cycles. He would only lead for a few yards before Cam Spinner would take the lead from him. He would lead for 2 laps before Jackson Storm would obviously take the lead. He would lead for 8 more laps before Harvey Rodcap would take the lead again, leading for only 2 laps before Chase Racelot would retake the lead. He would keep the lead until lap 327, where Danny Suarez would take the lead once again. He would lead for 2 more laps before Jackson Storm would take the lead again, leading for 8 more laps. But Tim Treadless would take the lead on lap 337, leading until lap 339, 2 laps before Jackson Storm would take the lead again, leading all the way until lap 342, where Danny Suarez would take the lead once again, leading for 6 more laps before Chase Racelot would retake the lead, leading for 3 more laps. Jackson Storm would obviously retake the lead on lap 351, leading for 4 more laps before Tim Treadless would retake the lead on lap 355. But on lap 362, Eric Breaker would take the lead again. He would lose the lead to H.J. Hollis only a few yards later, but less than a turn later, Chase Racelot would retake the lead, leading for 3 more laps before Jackson Storm would take the lead once again, leading all the way until lap 379, where Danny Suarez would take the lead again. He would lead for 2 more laps before Jackson Storm would of course retake the lead, leading for 8 more laps before the pit cycles would come and Chris Roman would take the lead. He wouldn't lead for very long because after the pit stops are done, Jackson Storm would lead another 9 laps and Tim Treadless would take the lead for himself on lap 398. But on lap 405, Cam Spinner would take the lead for himself and lead for 3 laps before Jackson Storm would take the lead once again, leading all the way until lap 447. Danny Suarez would take the lead on lap 447 and lead for 8 laps before Herb Kerbler would take the lead on lap 455. But of course, Jackson Storm has to retake the lead, leading until lap 461. Onto the commentary, where Shannon Spoke says 40 laps to go and race leader Jackson Storm is making his way to pit road. Chris Roman will take the lead in the meanwhile, and Lightning McQueen would say this to his pitty Guido in the pits. Guido would say this, fatto, to specify that he's done changing Lightning McQueen's tires. This was a very fast pit stop. Daryl Cartrip says, "What a pit stop by McQueen!" Meanwhile, Danny Suarez would take the lead and lead the field into lap 462. Lightning McQueen, after his pit stop is done, will take the lead. Daryl Cartrip says, "Man, he just got the lead!" And then, Bob Cutlass will say, "But can he hold on to it?" Doubting Lightning McQueen. Lightning McQueen is struggling to keep the lead as he is a stock car competing against next generation racers. Jackson Storm says this to Lightning McQueen and then takes the lead for himself once again, where he'll lead all the way until the final lap. That's not new. Bob Cutlass says Storm takes back the lead. Well, obviously it's Jackson Storm. And then Daryl Cartrip says, "Unbelievable! McQueen is fading." What's he talking about? Lightning McQueen goes from 2nd to 4th, falling behind Danny Suarez and Chase Racelot. And Lightning McQueen says, "No, no, no, no!" reacting to himself falling positions. But, oh no! Lightning McQueen gets loose! Now, what happens? Lightning McQueen gets loose. And here's more footage of Lightning McQueen getting loose. It seems like Lightning McQueen's chassis is on its way to the wall, as shown by this image. And then, after a little bit, Lightning McQueen's chassis hits the wall. I feel bad. That must hurt really bad. And then afterwards, Lightning McQueen's chassis would turn around, and it seems like it's going airborne. And Lightning McQueen goes airborne. And due to the sudden nature of this movement, Tim Treadless and Harvey Rodcap are afraid. And we never thought this would happen. But here is Lightning McQueen, barrel rolling through the air. And here's another image of Lightning McQueen barrel rolling. We never thought that he would crash. And here's Lightning McQueen's chassis on its way to hitting the ground, top first. And then Lightning McQueen's chassis springs off of the ground again, doing more barrel rolls through the air. And Lightning McQueen is now going into the catch fence, which is now making fans right behind it afraid. And here is another picture of Lightning McQueen barrel rolling through the air. And when his chassis does come to rest, it scrapes along the track. And then Lightning McQueen continues to roll, letting out more sparks. And Lightning McQueen continues to barrel roll with a lot of paint stuck to the track. And then Lightning McQueen's chassis comes to rest on the grass right in front of the start-finish line. That is Lightning McQueen's crash in the 2016 LA 500. And afterwards, his pit crew Luigi and Guido, as well as his significant other, Sally Carrera, and best friend, Tow Mater, will rush to the wreckage. Same with an ambulance and other medical vehicles. This crash is often compared with Lightning McQueen's mentor, the Hudson Hornets crash in 1954, as well as the King Strip Weathers crash in the tiebreaker race for the 2005 Dynaco 400. As a result of this crash, the red flag comes out on lap 464. After the red flag is lifted and the final 35 laps are ran, Jackson Storm would go on to win the 2016 LA 500, getting his 20th consecutive win! This win was to very little fanfare, as most Piston Cup fans were concerned about Lightning McQueen's condition after his potentially life-threatening crash. Danny Suarez will finish second this race. Chase Racelaw will finish third. Tim Treadless fourth. Harvey Rodcap fifth. Chris Roman sixth. H.J. Hollis seventh. Jonas Carver's eighth. Herb Kerbler ninth. And Cam Spinner rounding out the top 10. Paunchy Wipeout is the last car to finish on the lead lap this race, finishing 34th, one position ahead of Lightning McQueen. Before I get to the results of the race, I need to say that if you see results for the race elsewhere, they're telling you the running order on lap 464 before the red flag came out for Lightning McQueen's crash. And before that, I need to mention all of the cars that just retired after this race. There's a lot. Reb Meeker, Ricky Axel, Moray Clutchburn, Ralph Carlo, Jamarcus K-Cart, Rev Rodages, Paunchy Wipeout, Darren Leadfoot, Dino Draftski, Tony Gaswert, Casey Corner, Clint Bokar, Ryan Thunderbolt Jr., Trevor Turnrev, Ryan Rodages, Hank Weathers, Chad Motorgas, Aston Reynolds, Michael Botstroyer, Aaron Breakwheel, Danica Speedtrick, Joe Ricci, Ronald Clutcher, Joel McQueen, Nick Charger, Will Draftrev, Brendan Cargan, Mobius Gravendigger, Peter Cornfuel, Dino Zoomer, and Ethan Rodtesta all retired from the Piston Cup after this race. Now, Shannon Spokes is interviewing Tim Treadless about this race, and Tim Treadless said this to Shannon Spokes. Shannon's not done yet, as she's also interviewing Aaron Clocker, who then says this after the race. Now, let's get on to the results, where nobody really cared, and here's the top 10. Nobody really cared about who finished where, because everyone probably knew that Jackson Storm was going to win this race. Everybody was just concerned for Lightning McQueen. J.D. McPillar will be the car who misses out on finishing in the top 10, with Richie Gunzit, Ricky Axel somehow finishing 13th in his final race. Aaron Clocker and Jim Reverick rounding out the top 15, with Ryan Inside Laney, Bubba Wheelhouse flipped over, Eric Breaker and Barry DePedal rounding out the top 20. Reb Meeker earns 100 points from his final Piston Cup race. Brian Sparks somehow beats his nephew, Ed Trunken, in the race, with Steve Slick LePage and Buck Beeringly rounding out the top 25, with Ralph Carlo finishing 26th in his final Piston Cup race. Dan Garcia and JP Drive somehow finished behind him, with Rev Rodages and Darren Leadfoot rounding out the top 30 in their final start. Dino Draftski finishing 31st in his final start somehow beats Nick Shift. Moray Clutchburn, after 1,152 races, will finish his final race in 33rd. Paunchy Wipeout is the last car to finish on the lead lap this race, finishing 34th. Now, this race will be primarily remembered for what happened to Lightning McQueen. Let's hope that this race is not his last, finishing 35th and being out on lap 464. The 8 cars that finished behind Lightning McQueen were also unable to finish on the lead lap for different reasons. But who won the 2016 Piston Cup? It is, of course, Jackson Storm, who wins the 2016 Piston Cup, taking advantage of a last-minute change in the points format. It's been a while since I've made a picture like this because the 2015 Piston Cup season, well, the videos came out over a year ago. And as you can see here in the top 40, the top 14 are all reflective of the Piston Cup's last-minute change to the points format. Tim Treadless really got screwed here because Tim Treadless was leading in the points before this points format changed. Oh, and don't forget, Danny Swervez and Chase Racelot got Team Octane Gain and Vitalin second and third place finishes from one race. The stock cars, Bobby Swift and Brick Yardley, raced the other 35 races. Harvey Rodcap rounds out the top 5. Chris Roman and J.D. McPillar finished 6th and 7th, being Gears Motorsports' best racers this season, just ahead of Aaron Clocker and Ryan Inside Laney, finishing 8th and 9th. Flipped Over, who also got screwed over by this new point system, rounds out the top 10, with Ed Trunken and Dan Garcia rounding out the top 12. Lightning McQueen has his worst season, finishing 13th in points. But Lightning McQueen would have done better if the Piston Cup did not change the points format at the last minute, although he still beat Kevin Karvik. One of 5 cars in the top 40 who had a next generation upgrade. Cal Weathers, despite not racing in the final 13 races, still finishes 15th in points, ahead of JP Drive, which at times appeared to be the only car that was able to compete with Jackson Storm for wins. James Garrison finishes 17th, being the second car who needed a next generation upgrade, and also the other one in the top 20. Jonas Carvers, Barry DePedal, and Reb Meeker round out the top 20. Reb Meeker gets a top 20 finish in his final Piston Cup season, just ahead of Bubba Wheelhouse in 21st. H.J. Hollis. Team Entool Cola should thank this car, because without H.J. Hollis, they would be nowhere near the top 40. Parker Breakston barely qualified for races. And just behind H.J. Hollis is Pitbull Speed Racer, who also needed an upgrade. He still beats Nick Shift and Ricky Axel, rounding out the top 25. Ricky Axel will finish 25th in his final Piston Cup season. And right behind him in 26th is Ralph Carlo, who had a very good season, despite the fact he spent a lot of it in the back of the pack. And Jim Reverick will finish right behind him in 27th. Murray Clutchburn, finishing off his final Piston Cup season, will finish 28th in points. All the way from the 1985 Florida 500 to the 2016 LA 500. Murray Clutchburn did not fail to qualify for a single race throughout his career. Don't forget, he and Lightning McQueen are the only 2 racers who successfully started all 36 races this season. Behind Maury Clutchburn is Martin Carrix Jr., who, if he didn't miss many races due to a crash, Martin Carrix Jr. would have done way better this season. Herb Kerbler rounds out the top 30. Richie Gunzit will finish 31st this season, with Jamarcus Capehart finishing 32nd in his final Piston Cup season. Jamarcus Capehart could have done much better if it wasn't for the Next Generation Racer takeover. Cam Spinner is someone that definitely benefited because Terry Cargis did not qualify every race. Sebastian Silva finishes behind him in 34th, being the 5th and final racer who needed a Next Generation upgrade in the top 40. Eric Breaker finishes behind him in 35th. Brian Sparks had a good season this season, finishing 36th in points, because last season he finished 55th. Right behind him in 37th is Steve Slick LePage, who Team Trunk Fresh also needed because Dirksen D'Agostino wasn't performing that well. And right behind him is Green Bean Carfiend. Good job to the Carfiend team because the team did not exist at the start of the season. Well, you could say the same for Jackson Storm, but Jackson Storm won all of his races! Finishing 39th and 40th are Rev Rodages and Paunchy Wipeout, who will happily take their top 40 finishes to close out their careers. And Cal Williams finishes 31st, around 70 points behind Paunchy Wipeout. Darren Leadfoot will be the topic of tomorrow's video, and Dino Draftski will round out the top 43. But regardless of where any racer finished, I just hope that Lightning McQueen is doing okay.
Remember to press the notifications button, which goes ring, ring, ring after you press it. And lightning strikes back, and that's as if you subscribed, of course. And thank you for watching this entire video.
That was a long season. The 2016 Piston Cup season was easily one of the most eventful seasons in Piston Cup history. Not only with the way that the season ended, but also because of the next generation racers coming midway through the season. I don't understand why the Piston Cup let the next generation racers enter the Piston Cup midway through the season. At least give a chance for the stock cars to make choices about their futures. This could be done after the season, like right now, not while the season is still ongoing. And the next race in the Piston Cup is the 2017 Florida 500. We're going to see how the next generation racers handle their first full season. But I won't be making that video until the new year. The next video will be about Darren Leadfoot, and that video will be coming out tomorrow. It have taken me a long time to record all of the 2016 Piston Cup season, but the war in Ukraine has been going on for much longer than that. The war as a whole began in 2014 when Vladimir Putin, the tyrant and bully who started this whole war, gave the order Russian soldiers to take Crimea. And on February 24th, 2022, the full-scale war began. And after that date, every single one of my videos has had a Ukraine segment at the end of the video, or at the very least in the description. That is over 100 videos on this channel. The loser in this whole situation is Ukraine so far. The Ukrainian people have been left without peace, many without freedom, and some even without electricity or heat to get through the winter. Don't forget that around 20% of Ukraine's territory is illegally occupied by Vladimir Putin's tyranny. That is Crimea, the Donbass, and parts of the Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, and Kherson Oblasts. We here at the K Bullets Piston Cup YouTube channel stand with Ukraine in their struggle against Vladimir Putin's tyranny and recognize Ukraine's true borders as shown by this map that you see on the screen. Slava Ukrainie! Heroyam slava! Nechai Shvetsya Tarvetsya! Ukrainie Peromoha! Glory to Ukraine! Glory to the heroes! May Ukraine be granted victory very soon.